to start off the day, we've got Angie Byron joining us from Canada this morning. Angie's most often recognized by the name Webchick, and anyone who's been on Drupal.org's issue queues will most likely have seen her name somewhere along the way. She's currently working as a Senior Director of Product and Community Development at Acquia and is a Drupal core committer, having started off in 2005 with the Google Summer of Code, which inspired her to immerse herself into contributing to open source. It's because of people like Angie that we have both the Drupal software and the community, and amongst doing core patch reviews, improving the user experience of Drupal, strategic initiative coordination, and general community cat herding, she is a Drupal hero, and we're super chuffed to have her share some of her insights with us this morning. Angie, please go for it. Hopefully we still... Oh, we don't have any sound. Why not?
That's because I'm muted on my Hi, can you hear me now? That's probably better. Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. That was entirely too kind. I'm going to stop my video and then start my screen share just to cut down on bandwidth problems, but it's really nice to see you all. Thanks for coming out. All right. So this and this. All right. So the topic I'm here to talk to you about today is Drupal 9 and backwards compatibility and why now is the time to upgrade to Drupal 8. I purposely kept this talk a little bit short and it's pretty condensed because I want to leave lots of time for Q&A after. So well, hopefully that goal meets its, its actual thing in practice. So Ingrid already did a very nice job introducing me, so I'll skip over all of this stuff. I wanted to talk about our agenda. So I want to give a brief overview of Drupal, kind of a history and evolution of Drupal releases so that we can get the context of where Drupal 8 is heading and where the future of the project is going. And then I plan to, at the end, give some practical advice for site builders who are using Drupal 8 or planning to use Drupal 8 on how to go about that and some resource sharing and that sort of stuff. So hopefully that's of interest to the folks in the room. If not, I'm also someone who you can ask about general community stuff, to some extent Drupal association stuff, to some extent, you know, any kind of general Drupal community questions that you have. I talk to a lot of people and I'm very active in the community, so I'm happy to answer anything I can. So we'll get into it. So when I describe Drupal to people, I usually say, you know, it's kind of three things. So the first thing it is an incredibly flexible framework. So it's got all of these little add-on modules that you can glue together in different ways to make, you know, a website that is a, you know, cooking recipe database, or a website that is a blog with e-commerce and a wiki section, or, you know, a completely headless application that you use to talk to with a cell phone app, or anything that you can imagine, really. Drupal was kind of built from the ground by developers for developers. And then in recent years has seen a proliferation of, you know, movement towards the content authors and making more accessible to those as well. And so Drupal kind of carries that, that desire to always be flexible and easy to modify to whatever needs that you might have. It also has an amazing community behind it. So if this is the first Drupal event, how many people in the audience is this the first Drupal event you're attending? Wow, quite a few. Wow, that's awesome. Well, welcome to the community. The community around Drupal is really, really cool. Not only is it humongous, there's about 4,000 active contributors to Drupal core. There's 47,000 developers in general. There's thousands of modules that you can add to your collection of sites, all these kinds of things. And what I really love about the community is it's very welcoming. It's not the kind of thing where there's a lot of egos and trying to one-up each other. It's much more about sharing knowledge with one another and, you know, finding new people who don't know something and being really excited to tell them about it and that sort of thing. So hopefully your experience there at the event will also bear that true as well. The third thing that Drupal really tries to do is be always on the cutting edge of technology. And this manifests itself traditionally in the attitude of, in air quotes, we'll break your code and not your data. And so Drupal has traditionally chased the most modern standards, the biggest cutting edge development tools, these kinds of things to put in the software, because once again, its roots are a project by developers for developers. And this has served our project really well in that Drupal is actually, 16 years old at this point. So really old by any kind of software standards, and yet still manages to be a modern, content management system / content management framework / headless CMS / whatever you want it to be that people can use for lots of different things. But that root of cutting edge of technology has kind of been the result of, or it has caused some consternation, shall we say, with previous versions of Drupal, and get into that in a minute. Drupal 8 is the latest version of Drupal, and it's shipped with all kinds of nice, fancy features. A couple that I'm really excited about are a lot of content authoring improvements. So it ships with a WYSIWYG editor, automatically configured, secure out of the box, that kind of thing, and quick edit, which is an in-place editor for making quick adjustments to the title, body text, that kind of thing. Really excited about modern standards like mobile first development on the front end, HTML5 elements, these kinds of things. A lot of work done to make Drupal 8 more friendly to web services, both the consumption and the output of web services, and multilingual being a key portion of this too. And there were actually hundreds of features that shipped in Drupal 8. I asked on Twitter a few weeks ago, like, what people were most excited about who are using Drupal 8, and this is kind of what they said. Is they said the biggest things that they love about it are that it's modern object-oriented PHP. So obviously these are the developers saying this. But they love it because it's using all the modern features of PHP, cleaner, well-structured. It's got a steep learning curve if you're used to procedural PHP, which if you learn PHP via Drupal, you may have that experience. But if you're coming to Drupal from literally any other programming language, it's really easy to get into. Things are really well laid out. There's fewer concepts to learn overall, and then once you know them, it applies broadly to the code base and these kinds of things. So people really, really excited about that. The front-end developers are really excited about the new theming system. We use something called Twig, which basically is a really firm separation between your presentation layer and your business logic layer, so that you don't have to be a PHP developer in addition to knowing HTML and CSS really well. There's also really great security involved in our implementation of Twig, so it really cuts down on the risk of cross-site security vulnerabilities and these kinds of things. So awesome stuff there. And then configuration management was kind of the other big thing that people mentioned, is the ability to take settings that you've clicked around on your dev site and move it seamlessly to your staging and then onto your live site. And keeping the changes in files that can be version controlled and all of these kinds of things. So people really enjoy that a lot. My personal favorite thing about Drupal 8 is that, for the first time like ever, you can actually build real actual sites out of the box without hundreds of contributed, not that many, but a lot of times in the past, Drupal core was very small and slimmed down and, did a few things out of the box, but you needed contributed modules almost immediately in order to do a thing. And one great thing about Drupal 8 is because it ships with views, because it ships with all kinds of extra fields like email, date field, these kinds of things, entity reference. You can actually build full-featured websites out of the box. What I'm showing here is a screenshot mock-up from the out-of-the-box experience initiative that they're working on to create a default installation of Drupal that looks beautiful. And this is all stuff you can do with core, which is really exciting. Drupal 8 is also seeing a maturing contrib ecosystem. As of about January of this year, things are starting to pick up quite a bit. There's over 1,400 stable projects, including ones that you might know, like Drupal Commerce, Panels, Search API. There's a bunch of the kind of big infrastructure modules that have gone stable this year, and that's influencing a lot of the Drupal 8 adoption. Drupal 8 is now the go-to release for most agencies. So this was a business survey done earlier this year to a bunch of the CXOs of various Drupal businesses. They're all pretty much using Drupal 8, a little bit of Drupal 7 still in the mix. And then there's numerous success stories. So these are all examples of companies that use Drupal 8 successfully. One that I really like is the YMCA, which is an American based nonprofit. Basically, they're using Drupal to power their entire nonprofit's network of sites, or aiming to do that, to drastically cut down on their IT infrastructure, because every dollar they say goes into helping, you know, at-risk youth have better lives, and so they are very motivated to do that. So I think that's awesome when Drupal can help really good causes like that. So that's kind of an overview of Drupal and what it is and what it does. I also wanted to give a history of Drupal release management. So for the folks in the audience, how many people have used Drupal at all at this point? Okay, looks like roughly half. Okay. And how many of you have used Drupal 7? Okay, just about everybody. And then how many of you have used Drupal 8? Oh, wow. Okay. So you guys, this might be review for you then. We'll see. All right. So history of release management. And the folks who have used Drupal can kind of nod along with this part. So in the past, and there's even a further distant past, but I'm starting from Drupal 5 here. We used to develop Drupal releases about once a year. So Drupal 4.7 came out in 2006, Drupal 5 came out in 2007, Drupal 6 in 2008. And then each one of those would have the philosophy, again, because we want to chase that latest technology, that we would break your code and not your data. And what that meant is that we would break APIs, so modules need to be ported, but there would be an upgrade path provided for the data, so your users and your content and this kind of thing would make the transition from one major version to the other once all your code was realigned and working. Starting with Drupal 7, we started to see much longer release cycles. And a lot of that has to do with wanting to do a lot more ambitious things in Drupal 7. And then especially in Drupal 8, you know, the various things that I showed you there, that all took a lot of time to get a configuration management system and web services support and these sorts of things. But the end result is that the timelines for development are getting longer and longer. And given Drupal released kind of on a when it's ready basis, people couldn't plan around that, and it actually presented a bunch of challenges. So end users didn't know when to expect new features or how to plan for migrations. There's also little incentive based because of that to fund any core developers, which led to a lot of burnouts. We would almost churn 3/4 of the core development team every release. When we couple new features that are awesome and you want to try out with backwards compatibility breaks, that means you're very limited in what innovation you can do. So like Drupal 7, for example, still ships with the same version of jQuery that it did in 2011, which is not ideal because jQuery doesn't even support that anymore. So it's fine. You just use the jQuery update module and you're good to go. But just having to kind of keep this frozen in time sort of aspect for years is sort of not optimal. Let's put it that way. And that also meant that a lot of people would stay on, say, Drupal 5 until Drupal 7 was released, because we support each version of Drupal for, you know, the next one, and it basically end of life as, you know, if you skip a number, it's end of life then. So Drupal 5 is supported until Drupal 7 comes out, Drupal 6 is supported until Drupal 8 comes out, and so on. So a lot of people would just stay on that old release until they had to move off of it. But by then, not only are they dealing with kind of a really, you know, huge upgrade path, but also the way in which you build sites has just changed dramatically. And so it becomes a really, really tough situation for people. So in Drupal 8, we've scrapped all of that and we've started doing it this way instead. So we now do what's called semantic versioning. So 8.1.0, 8.2.0, et cetera. These are called minor releases, and they come out every 6 months. And every 6 months, they provide new features. So for example, in 8.2.0, we added the content moderation module, which adds workflow capabilities. You know, in Drupal 8.4.0 that just came out, we added a media and layout API that Contrib can use to stabilize their work. And we have a bunch of cool stuff in the works for Drupal 8.5.0 as well, which is due out in March. And this is really awesome because these all releases happen not only faster than releases were happening before, but they also are done with backwards compatibility. So that means you don't have to break all of your code every 6 months. Instead, we'll preserve the backwards compatibility with these backwards compatibility layers, but you still get the features every 6 months that you would have previously had to wait, you know, potentially years for. So that's a really exciting development. We also have introduced, because of this release cycle, the concept of LTS, or long-term support releases, as well as like a security fixes only stage where, you know, a type of release is kind of in its sunset phase, but still supported. So you can see kind of a mock-up. This is just an example of how this would go, but you know, when 8.0 shipped, Drupal 7 came in, kind of went into a long-term support system. So we stopped adding new features at that point. We basically just are in bug fixes. And then once 9 is branched, we're going to go to security fixes only until 9 is released. So, that, you know, we'll repeat with 8 as well once Drupal 10 is released. We're also doing a lot more innovation in core through the use of experimental modules. So these are modules that are not quite baked ready yet, but we include in the software so that you can get a preview of, you know, what sort of features we're hoping to add to the core product soon. And then we can get user feedback early and often, as opposed to shipping something and then only getting user feedback after the fact when we can no longer fix anything. So this is a really exciting new development as well. So the benefits here, some of those are pretty obvious. Like a predictable release schedule means that both end users and core developers can plan and organize around this. So you know in advance when you need to plan to maybe do a little bit more testing than you would a normal release. Site builders get to acquire powerful new functionality without reinventing their site every 6 months, which is really helpful. Opportunities to get end user feedback, as I mentioned, through the experimental process. But the big thing is that when we do ship Drupal 9 is just going to be one of these normal minor releases. So just like we saw the difference between an 8.2.0 and an 8.3.0, the difference between Drupal 8 point whatever it ends up being and 9 should be a very little jump like that, just without the backwards compatibility layers there anymore. And so if you've been keeping up with Drupal 8 the whole time, you should be good to go without any pain or agony, which would be wonderful. So Drupal 9, we don't know when Drupal 9 is going to ship. We basically said we're not going to ship Drupal 9. We're going to branch Drupal 9 once we've kind of reached the end of awesome things we can do in Drupal 8 without clobbering ourselves with these deprecated backwards compatibility layers. And so far, we don't seem to have even come close to running out of runway on Drupal 8. So you're still good for a while on that. When we do branch Drupal 9, there'll be announcements about this. I've got slides later that talk about where to look for those kinds of announcements. And we're hoping to give people definitely 6 months, but hopefully up to a year's notice before we would do something like that, because it does impact people using Drupal 7. So how do you put all this into practice? So here's a bunch of resources, and I apologize for firebombing you with links. I'll make the slides available after so you can use this as a resource. So the first thing I would say is if you're using Drupal 8, you should know the release schedule. So at this page, we have a table that includes all of the dates of the releases that are coming up, important dates to be mindful of. So for example, March 7th is when 8.5.0 is going to be released. At that point, 8.4.x gets dropped. So we no longer do any bug fixes or security releases or anything like that for Drupal 8.4 once Drupal 8.5 ships. However, a few months prior to that, the week of January 17th is when the alpha is released. That's when effectively 8.5 is in feature freeze. So this is a great time to start using 8.5 on your production, or not on your production website, sorry, but on your development and staging websites to make sure that, you know, the changes that go in there haven't broken anything unexpectedly in your sites. Because at that point, there's still time for us to revert anything that might have made a problem. And so I highly encourage people, you know, to pay attention a lot that week to what's happening in Drupal 8 land in case it affects you. If you want to keep abreast of the forthcoming changes as they're happening, there's this page, which also has a Twitter account, so you can follow a list of any what are called API change records. So this is when something significant has happened. So for example, in Drupal 8.4.0, we dropped support for a deprecated version of Symfony. We now use Symfony 3, which was announced, you know, prior to Drupal 8's release that we were going to do that. But, you know, so people weren't caught unawares. There was an announcement about that through this channel that people could see ahead of time and prepare themselves for. We also announced big announcements like that, like, hey, we're starting the release candidate phase next week, or hey, there's this new roadmap we're planning for 8.5, you should check it out, at groups.drupal.org/core. So that's another great place to check for these kinds of announcements to keep abreast of what's happening. Also good to understand what backwards compatibility means, because we do, it doesn't mean we're frozen like Drupal 7 is frozen, where we don't touch anything at any time. What it does mean is that we explicitly mark certain aspects of the software as an API, and that stuff we do not break for any reason other than if there was some kind of a critical security flaw, versus something marked at internal, for example, like the name of a column of a table or something like that, that we can change, because there are APIs to prevent you from having broken code as long as you're using them properly. So it's good to be familiar with what's on this page. The release notes themselves, the core committers spend a bunch of time on these to make sure that they're very thorough. So I would recommend really taking a look at those, particularly the known issues parts, because those will help with any gotchas that you might encounter when you're upgrading to a minor release. You can also preview the goals we have for 8.5.0 and beyond. There's a page at core/roadmap as of like a month ago or something that, you know, where we went out, talked to all of the initiative leads, said, hey, you know, what are you planning for 8.5? Where do you need help? This kind of thing. So this is a great place to not only look at what's coming, but also to jump in and help, because Drupal development is done in a do-ocracy manner, which means that things only happen when people do them. There's not a company behind Drupal, you know, paying developers to do nothing but work on Drupal. Unlike some other open source projects, Drupal is actually an organic, true open source project. So people work on stuff, you know, either because their employer thinks they should, or because they think it's fun, or this kind of thing. But all of these initiatives are, you know, sort of what we intend to do, but not necessarily what we will do on a certain time frame without some help. So here's some of the cool things on the roadmap that I'm really excited about. You know, stuff like JSON API native support for people who are in REST web services, a layout builder that's drag and drop and smooshy. It's awesome. It's actually working, which is really exciting. I'm really excited as well about having a proof of concept of what Drupal does out of the box available, because oftentimes people stand Drupal up next to WordPress and are like, wow, this looks like an ugly blog, not realizing the power that sort of lies underneath it. So I'm really excited about that. So each of the things in the roadmap have links to issues that you can jump into if you want to help. And when I say help, I don't just mean code. There's actually a ton of different ways that you can get involved: documentation, accessibility testing, project management, all kinds of stuff. So literally any skill that you have could be put to good use, and feel free to talk to me more about that if you'd like to get involved and help. I know what you might be saying is, oh, I love what you're talking about with Drupal 8, but I'm still on Drupal 7. And the first thing I want to say is, like, that's completely fine. Like, don't worry about it if you're on Drupal 7. If Drupal 7 is working for you, that's great. But if D8 offers the features you want, you might consider earlier adoption, just because the closer you are to upgrading to Drupal 8 before Drupal 8 and Drupal 7 site building start to diverge too much, just the easier it's going to be on you. So if you're planning or thinking about a Drupal 8 migration, there's a project called Contrib Tracker, which is really great to keep an eye on. So any modules that you might be using will hopefully have a record here, and this is where the maintainer will post updates as far as how the porting process is going, where they're stuck and they need help, and this kind of thing. And there's also a place you can go to practice the migration path and see how that's working for your site. Because Drupal 8 now ships with a migration versus an upgrade path, which is nice because it means your production website doesn't have to be upgraded in place. You can instead take your time on the migration for however long it takes and then switch to DNS over at the last minute for very minimal downtime, which is great. So my message to you all is don't delay, try Drupal 8 today. Here are some resources on how to do that. And with that, I wanted to turn it over to see if people had any questions. Stunned silence. I know it's early. it's late here, but it's early there. Yeah. For folks who've tried Drupal 8, what are your findings of it so far? Are you liking it? Is it a huge pain in the butt? How's it going over there?
Hi, Angie. Actually, first time we've actually spoke, we've just been on emails, I think, so far. It's Chris here from Wilco. So one thing that, as you say, there are a few gotchas here and there, but how do certain things, let's say, how do certain things slip in without people actually following up with them? So a stupid example is views and fields. So if you have a field in your content type, delete that field, your view that used that field just proofs. So, where do you start to actually get that sorted as soon as possible? I mean, for instance, let's say a site builder starts out with Drupal. I mean, we know we've been working with Drupal and we get these little things every now and then, we cover them quite quickly. But say, for instance, the site builder starts with the site. He's built his nice fielded view, which, fielded views still exist for some people. But he's built a fielded view and he decided, let's change my telephone field to an input field for a number instead of a text field, for instance. And if he deletes that field, the view goes away. What happened? Well, where does the novice site builder start with something like that? If he has that issue, for instance.
Okay. So I heard a lot of those words, but I didn't quite make out exactly what you're saying. Because the audio is a little crunchy.
And if I'm a bit closer, is that better? No?
That is a bit better, yeah.
Okay, cool. So my main thing is just where do novices start if they run into issues? Because obviously we know about all the other resources that you can get, but where does a novice go if he runs into a core issue specifically? And how does he get help to actually resolve those issues? Because we know where to get them. Do you have any insights on where novices can actually go to sort those issues out for themselves?
Right. Okay. So I think the question was, where would somebody who's kind of a novice to Drupal get help if they run into some kind of a problem? Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Specifically actually with something like core.
Yeah, with something like core. So there's several places that people go. I'll share my screen again here. So one thing I would say is people don't tend to use the support forums, even though Drupal has a support forum. So I would say probably don't ask there. Drupal Stack Exchange is something where a lot of people ask questions. These are mainly around like site building types of questions though, like, hey, I'm having this problem with my specific, site, this kind of thing. If you're having a problem with core where I just downloaded Drupal 8.4 and oh my God, my site is blowing up and help, I don't know what's happening. What I usually do there is head to the Drupal issue queue. So every project on Drupal.org has an issue queue associated with it. And so here you can search for any kind of an error that you're having, so I could search for like drush, for example, if I'm having a drush problem, and then you'll see a list of things. This is quite technical though. So this is really only mainly if you're a developer or you're comfortable reading developer speak, but it's a nice place to start just because you can get, this is a much better place to start, but you won't get a lot of core developers there necessarily. This is a great place to start if you have a specific error message because you might find other people who have that problem. You can see if an issue has already been committed to the development branch. So, oh, okay, great. I just wait for the next release then and I'm good. Or each one of these will have a patch that you can apply if you are feeling adventurous and that kind of thing. Drupal also has a Slack, where there are a bunch of channels in there where you can talk directly to some of the contributors. There's a general channel where people go to get support. There's a contrib channel where the contributors hang out. There's a support channel, this kind of thing. This is generally where people are. There are also IRC channels where people hang out, but that's a little less accessible to novices, I would say. But those are a bunch of different avenues that you can go to get support. I feel like though you maybe were fishing for me to make a recommendation specifically for core. I mean, honestly, the place where core committers look for problems and that sort of thing is they do look at the issue queue. So if you found a problem, you searched and you couldn't find the problem that you're looking for, you know, creating a new issue here and being very specific about I did this and this happened and this error and I tried that and that didn't work or whatever would be helpful. This form is kind of horrific and is really long and intimidating, but the more information you can provide here, the better off you are. So the core committers do check this queue, particularly right after release, to see if any new things are coming in that people are getting bitten by. So that's probably the first place I would check, because that's kind of the up-to-date minute, you know, information of what people are concerned about. But if it's more about, less about I hit an issue with Drupal core and more like, I want to know what the best module for this is or that, you know, some of the other resources like Slack, Drupal Answers, these kinds of things are generally speaking what people use for that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. That's a good question too, by the way, because we forget that people start out with Drupal and have problems with it. I'm just kidding. Drupal has no problems. So there you go. Everybody laughs at that. Yeah. Okay. Are there other questions from the audience? Yes. Hi.
Yes, I have a question. You showed a screenshot of a theme or of a site build, which you said was going to be a way of seeing Drupal's capabilities. Is this going to take the form of a composer build or a new default theme? What exactly is it going to be? It's not something that I've heard of yet.
I heard most of that. So you were talking about the screenshot I had of the site that was already built?
Yes.
And the example, right, okay. So that screenshot is coming from, if you go to this handy dandy page of strategic, the strategic initiatives page. So this page provides an overview of all the active initiatives kind of going on in Drupal core. So this one is called the out of the box experience. And so what this initiative is about taking, basically being a showcase of what Drupal can do out of the box. So it involves creating an installation profile that's going to set up some demo content. It's involving, here, I'll show you the designs. The designs are so cool, but it's involving a brand new theme for that distribution that is tailored specifically to their use case, which is like a recipe site. So if we look at like the front page, you can see that they're going to be doing stuff like, ooh, there's a menu already made for you. There's recipes of, you know, different types of things. So you get to see how Drupal deals with structured content. So like this is a piece of content called recipe, and it has fields like, you know, food groups or ingredients or this kind of thing. Versus, you know, this down here is more of an ad. It links to something called a page. There's all kinds of views that bring up different types of things. So here's all the recipes that are 20 minutes or less. Here's things that are just, you know, dessert menus, these kinds of things. So what this is trying to do is show people the power of what Drupal can do out of the box, and also show that Drupal doesn't have to look like Bartik, which is the default theme, every time that you install it. So this is much more focused on the idea of creating, you know, basically a selection that you get during installation where, you know, you have the choice between standard and minimal, and then there would be example. So it would give you the option during installation to say, I want the example profile, and then it would install a site that looks like what we just saw. It does not do anything with Composer or anything like that. So for people who don't know, Composer, not that, sorry, is it getcomposer.com? I feel like I should know this. There. Composer is a tool, relatively recent tool in the PHP world, but it's a tool that's used for managing dependencies of your project. And so there's this huge library of all available PHP, stuff. So you can find everything in here. You can find, Drupal in here. You can find, the things that, like Guzzle is an example of an HTTP client that we use in Drupal 8 to go and fetch stuff off of web services and things like that. So any PHP package you can imagine just about is in this thing. And Composer is a means of tying those things together. And a lot of people really like it because I'm looking for an example here. This, I think. Nope, that's way too detailed. Anyway, it's this little JSON file, and it has a bunch of metadata in it about like, hey, this is what my project is about, and here's the dependencies it needs, and here's the version of the dependencies it needs, and da 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 da. And you define that in one place, and then Composer just like magically figures it out for you. So it downloads the right versions of things and puts them in the right places and that sort of stuff. So it's a huge bunch of stuff you don't need to remember anymore. And it's modeled after, things like NPM for the Node community, or, any other kind of like package management kind of thing, and like Linux or that sort of stuff. And so a lot of people are shifting to a Composer-based site building process, which you can find out more about at using Composer with Drupal. There's a couple of different methods. Maybe this isn't the page. That's weird. Anyway, somewhere in here, there's documentation on how to set your site up so that it's using Composer for this. And the nice thing about that is when a new version of Drupal comes out, then you can just say like Composer update, and it will grab stuff. Just do that. It doesn't quite work that seamlessly yet. And so we still need to do a little bit more work to make that a little bit nicer for people. But there are various tools and best practices to try to get you up to speed with that. One that I hear a lot about is Drupal VM. Is like a local Drupal development environment that, kind of sets up all the best practices for you in terms of managing your Drupal site. So you don't need to think too hard. So it automatically comes with, PHP 7, which is the latest, fancy version of PHP, and all these different tools already built in out of the box, that kind of stuff. So that's one area that I'm aware of. Composer in general is kind of a hot button topic in the Drupal world because Drupal is using it as a project, but yet Drupal is a dependency of other people's websites, and so it gets a little funny. And so there's still a little bit of back and forth about what the best practices are for that. That's still evolving. But in general, that's definitely where things are headed. One initiative that's interesting that Dries announced in his, Dries, the project lead of Drupal, announced in his keynote in Vienna a couple weeks ago at DrupalCon Vienna was the automatic updates initiative. And what this is planning to do is just like WordPress has the ability to automatically send down new versions of core and contributed projects when they're available. We plan to do the same type of functionality in Drupal, and that's almost certainly going to be built off of Composer under the hood, because it's built for that sort of stuff. Getting it to work for automatic upgrades mean it would work for websites as well. So there's a bunch of people digging into that now after the announcement in Vienna. So hopefully we'll hear more about that soon. That was a little rambly, but did that answer your question?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Cool. I think I had one more question, and then I think we're about 20.
So I'm new to this Drupal thing, and I would like to know what's the difference between Drupal and WordPress, and then also what are the perks of using Drupal instead of coding my own website using my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
I caught the first part of the question, which was what is the difference between WordPress and Drupal, but I didn't catch the second part.
What's the benefit of using Drupal as opposed to using just coding HTML without a CMS?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, that's a great question. So what I like about Drupal, so WordPress is awesome. Like WordPress is great. It's open source, yay, whatever. WordPress, traditionally anyway, has been very focused on the publishing use case. So if you want a blog up and running in 5 minutes, WordPress is amazing for that. Drupal is not a set it up in 5 minutes and let it go kind of thing at all. Hopefully the out-of-box experience helps get it more to that point. Drupal is way more of a tinkerer's CMS. So Drupal is awesome because when you use a product like WordPress and you want, say, a photo gallery, you search for photo galleries and then you have a selection of 17 different photo galleries and you kind of pick and choose the one that mostly works the way you want it and then you go with that one. With Drupal, the way it's architected is everything is in these reusable little Lego block kind of things. So with Drupal, you can search photo gallery and find a photo gallery module, but it's much more common that you build the photo gallery that you want. And the way that you do that is not by writing a whole bunch of code, but instead by clicking together in the user interface little forms and stuff like that. So like Drupal has a concept of content types. You create a content type called image. You add a field called title, a field called image, you know, it's an image field, and a field called description or something like that. And the nice thing about image fields is you can use that same type of image field, not only for your photo gallery, but also for your album covers, also for your profile pictures, and this kind of thing. So the work that you do to, say, make the images certain sizes or this kind of thing applies broadly to everything in your website. So you don't get this disjointed experience of saying, oh, your photo gallery was made by Bob, and so it's purple, but your album covers thing is made by, you know, Stephanie, and it's blue and has bezel, you know, or what, a bevel and emboss kind of everywhere. So it's a lot more seamless and integrated things. And the idea of perfecting, here, let's figure out how to encapsulate an image in a field, and now you can apply that broadly to anything on your site, is kind of something that runs true with Drupal. The other thing that Drupal has that's really beneficial that plays off of that structured content concept is a feature that's in core called views. And views is a thing to make lists of stuff. So for example, you can make a list of stuff that's literally a list. So like, say, a sidebar block that says recent content or recommended for you or these kinds of things. But a list can also be a slideshow banner on the front page. It can also be a calendar of events. It can also be, you know, a REST API dump of JSON from a bunch of things. So because Drupal stores its content in individual fields like that, it allows you to mix and match chunks of that content in any way that you want, which is really beneficial because in a more page-centric model, like say Adobe CQ5 is very page-centric. You are typing the whole thing into the contents of a page, but if you want to just pull the title, the teaser image, and say the first, you know, line of the sentence, and you want to put that in a block somewhere on the sidebar, that's really, really difficult to do. With Drupal, it's about, you know, 3 clicks to do something like that. Nah, maybe more like 10. But and as far as why Drupal and not custom coding HTML and CSS, I mean, what I like about it is that Drupal has people that think about things like security and internationalization and all these other problems that when I was writing my own custom CMSs, I certainly was not thinking nearly enough about those things. Drupal has an entire security team that not only covers Drupal, the software itself, but also all of the add-on modules that have opted in the security coverage, which is a really huge benefit that I don't think any other open source project has. Most other open source projects have a security team behind the thing, but the add-ons are kind of all over the internet. And you're kind of on your own with those. So that's a huge benefit of using Drupal. I also think like Drupal is great because you can turn it over to a client, you know, and you can say, here, go fill out your forms and create your content about your, you know, the products that you sell. I'm going to go do fun things, you know, because I never found hand typing HTML to be a particularly awesome use of my, you know, time, talent, or interest. But I really enjoy, you know, solving problems like, ooh, how do I find the best library for, you know, this kind of thing or the other thing. So if you are a developer, it's really great because it gets out of your way. It makes doing the, you know, the kind of boring, mundane things easy because you just click them together in a few minutes. then you can hand that off to a customer who can continue to make changes on their own without bugging you too much about it. And then you can focus your time as a developer on making cool, really innovative custom code that is what you're supposed to be doing, as opposed to like writing HTML and getting paid to update the copyright symbol on the, boss footer image and this kind of thing. So, so those are the 3 reasons I like it. But I highly, highly encourage you to talk to others in the room, because one of the great things about Drupal is it's got this amazing open source community that's global and everywhere. And so being face to face with other people who, you say the word Drupal to and they don't go, oh, bless you, because they have no idea what you're talking about. That's a really, really good thing for you to do, and you can get all kinds of awesome feedback that way as well. But that would be how I would answer it. So it's great for structured content, which is particularly useful in headless applications, pulling things into sidebar lists, that kind of thing. The views module is great because it lets you just click together views of anything. And then the community around it is the 3rd thing. I guess the 4th thing I'd say is Drupal is really good if you have customers who don't know what they want, which is most customers in my experience. Because if they say, I want a blog today, but then next week it's like, oh, also it needs e-commerce. And then the next week it's like, oh, also it needs an image gallery. It's like, all right, click, click, click. And you can click all that stuff together pretty easily.
Cool, yeah, and I think also as Dries said at his Dries Notes a couple of weeks ago in Vienna, Drupal is great for ambitious sites. So sites that, as Angie says, starts maybe with a blog, but then has the potential to grow to be something bigger. Drupal's really great at being something that's scalable, that can be 5 pieces of content or 5,000. It's really good for that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and hopefully through the course of today, you guys who don't know Drupal that well, hopefully you'll learn more and get to know more the difference between Drupal and WordPress or anything else and why you actually want to use it. So yeah, I think Angie, we're done with time for this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
For getting up
it was really great to meet you all, and have a great conference.
Cool, thank you.
All right.